Hi everyone. So I see a couple of people are coming into the webinar now, but I'll just wait a few more moments before starting for more people to join. But welcome for the meantime. Okay, so yeah, not to waste any more time, I think we can get started. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. And welcome to this webinar, which is a collaboration between the Tropical Forest Alliance's Jurisdictional Action Network and ISEAL. So in this webinar, we're going to look at some of the new available tools to assist companies to initiate and take more landscape scale action. And these tools include a map of landscape and jurisdictional initiatives and multi-stakeholder processes and platforms, as well as a roadmap for effective company landscape action and claims. So before we get started, I'm just going to do some very quick housekeeping. So my name is Jack, and I work for the Tropical Forest Alliance as a project specialist. During the webinar today, we would appreciate it if you could share your questions in the Q&A function, and please feel free to send these questions throughout. Just to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on the Jurisdictional Approaches Resource Hub, and I'll share those links in the chat in a second, and also on ISEAL's website. And if you have any technical problems, please get in touch with me with my emails just there, and I can try and solve them. So yeah, today we'll be joined by some great panelists who will take part in a panel discussion a little later on in the webinar. We have Tom from Tesco, who's the Group Forests Manager, Norma from CDP, who's the Technical Manager for Forest and Land. We have Patrick, who's the Director for Innovations at ISEAL, and we also have John Buchanan, who is the Vice President for Sustainable Production at Conservation International. So without further hesitation, I'm going to pass over to Norma from CDP. And as you may be aware, TFA and CDP have been formally collaborating since 2022 on landscape and jurisdictional approaches. So Norma is going to provide a bit of a background on the ongoing collaboration and will also present one of the first tools that we're talking about today. So yeah, please take it away, Norma.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you all for being here. So, well, starting from the beginning, a quick recap on the definitions. A landscape is understood as a defined geographic area with common and interacting ecological and socioeconomic characteristics. And when we talk about landscapes, we talk about seascapes, watersheds, natural ecosystems, working productive landscapes, jurisdictions, and several other synonyms. A landscape approach or a jurisdictional approach, a seascape approach, a watershed approach is the idea, is the method, is the way that we see that sustainability can be actually achievable at scale, that nature, society, and economies can thrive over time if we look at the right scale or we collaborate at the right scale. We think that if we broaden our perspective from a sectorized view to cross-sectorial and we collaborate, then it's possible to achieve landscape sustainability. And that socio-ecological resilience is best with an integrated landscape management view. And a landscape initiative or a jurisdictional initiative or a seascape initiative, watershed initiative is the actual contract, the agreement, the actual action on the ground, usually labeled as programs or initiatives. Okay, so next one, please. Well, the momentum for sustainable landscapes is now. On the science part, the Earth Commission gives us the Earth system boundaries, and specifically as part of the biodiversity component, it highlights two interconnected systems, the natural ecosystems, and the working landscapes, and both boundaries reflecting the need for addressing socio-ecological and economic needs at landscape scale. On the policy side, we have the Convention of Biological Biodiversity, which has agreed the Global Biodiversity Framework and determined the 23 targets to achieve by 2030 and 2050. And how this implementation of the targets is supposed to happen? Well, as specified by the convention, the ecosystem approach is the primary framework for action, or in other words, the ecosystem approach, including landscape approaches, seascape, watershed approaches, etc., is the primary framework for implementing the 23 targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Also, on the policy side, we acknowledge that many of the most advanced and mature landscape initiatives are the result of the climate change discussions. And on the subnational efforts, particularly all the efforts to align agendas on priority locations and reverse emissions from nature loss or degradation have been coming from jurisdictional REDD+ efforts and are now evolving into jurisdictional approaches. Lastly, on the corporate side, we especially highlight the TNFD framework, which is now requesting corporates to identify priority locations with the operations of their value chain, so to identify priority landscapes. SBTN, with the current methods on land and oceans, that highlights that companies will be able to set targets to commit to support or engage in landscapes, seascapes, or jurisdictional initiatives. And similarly, on the climate side, landscapes and jurisdictional initiatives are recognized as beyond value chain mitigation actions and implementation strategies for achieving Scope 3 emissions on SBTI. Yes, well, science, policy, and corporate agendas are getting aligned around the importance of collective action at landscape scale. And well, what can we do to help this to move forward? So next one, please. In 2022, TFA coordinated a global study together with Proforest and CDP, and kudos here to our ex-colleague Leonie, who facilitated a lot of these results. I hope she's listening. But well, in this study, we wanted to provide a global state-of-the-art of the landscape initiatives that had the support from companies and that had a commodity production associated on cocoa, palm oil, pulp and paper, beef, or soy. For this global study, we followed a desk research, we conducted several interviews, and we also used the CDP disclosed data, which to date reflects that there is an exponential growth of companies engaging in landscape initiatives, from 27 companies in 2020 to 235 in 2023. And the expected is just that it will keep growing for the next years. So the global study gave us the inspiration to develop this map that we are now going to be presenting. And you can see more information about this study in the Jurisdiction Approach Hub and of course on CDP website as well. The map features data from companies, governments, and civil society. We have, as part of the corporates, the results of this study in the green circles. Green triangles, we have the corporate disclosed data from 2022 and 2023, following the assessment of the core criteria that is now being evolving. Patrick will give us more details about this core criteria on landscapes and jurisdictional initiatives. And we are also featuring in red triangles the states and regions disclosed data from 2022 and 2023. And the map has also information on multi-stakeholder processes or platforms, which was an additional feature that was provided by partner stakeholders, several interviews, and yeah, well, we gathered this information really thanks to all of these organizations, and this information was collected this year from February to July of this year. So now let's deep dive on the map. Thank you. Okay, so you can see on the right side, the filters, these are very simple. You have country level, you have type of initiatives, which will be these ones of the legend, companies, initiatives with a company engagement, initiatives led by governments, or multi-stakeholder governance processes or platforms. You have commodities. We have extended the commodity types, so we are not only covering the 5 commodities of the global studies, but we include any other commodity, rubber, rice, many others, cotton, etc. So, and we have implementer. This is very important because we think that this can facilitate investors in the journey of engaging with credible landscape initiatives by identifying which implementers, which stakeholders are collaborating in the current initiatives and how to contact them and, well, facilitate this. So let's deep dive. Let's go to Indonesia to begin with, one of our countries with more landscapes and jurisdictional initiatives identified. And so if we take a look at this initiative, this one was disclosed by several companies in 2022 and in 2023. Is a jurisdictional initiative that combines the efforts from 2 districts, so from 2 municipalities. The implementer is Caleca, and it includes different commodities, palm oil, timber, coconut, rubber. It is not a new initiative, so this also signals when is the initiative started. As we can see, this one has almost 10 years of experience. And if you take a look at the link of more information, sorry, yes, there is also the option for you to click on the more information, and then you will get access to the website of the landscape initiative, where you can find more details about the initiative, the land use, the conservation objectives, the progress, the impact, and the recognized partners by the initiative. So yes, this is just one example of the initiatives in Indonesia. Now, for example, we can filter just a country. Let's filter Malaysia. And so from Malaysia, you can also know if Malaysia is one of your priority locations for your value chain or for your commodity production, then you can here see what are the current landscape initiatives that which commodities are addressed from the landscape initiatives that we have mapped, and which stakeholders you can contact as well to get more information or to start supporting or engaging in one of the initiatives that they are facilitating. Okay, so now let's go a little bit now to the Americas. While moving, you can see also that we have initiatives featured in the Global North. So these are not initiatives only for Global South, but well, now on the red triangles. So these are the initiatives disclosed by governments. These are the jurisdictional initiatives that are being also featured in the map. For example, this one in Jalisco, the meat-free deforestation and free grazing system in Jalisco, which was disclosed by the Ministry of Environment from the state, and it includes also the governance, multi-level governance structure at an intermunicipal scale. And you can also click on more information about this jurisdictional initiative. And here, for example, is the link about the Carne Libre de Deforestación, the program from the state of Jalisco. So now on the multi-stakeholder governance processes and platforms. So for example, we see in South America, some initiatives some platforms in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Peru, in Brazil. We are near the final version. One or two more updates will be happening, particularly on the blue dots for multi-stakeholder processes and platforms. But from Colombia, we can see the HILIA platform, which has been facilitated by Conservation International and IDH, and it covers coffee and cocoa commodities, and it's a very important one because also covers 14 municipalities from this region. In Ecuador also, there is a multi-stakeholder governance process or platform connected with the sustainable palm oil production, which represents and includes the representation, of a lot of the ministries and environmental stakeholders from the country. And just to end, well, not last but not least, we cannot leave without presenting a case such as the one in Mato Grosso, Brazil, that basically features all the elements of the that we have included in the map. No, it has companies disclosing engagements in Mato Grosso Jurisdictional Initiative. It has a multi-stakeholder governance process or platform, which is a PCI Institute. The state of Mato Grosso is also disclosing to CDP the PCI Institute and their jurisdictional initiative. And well, this was just a quick round on the map, but please let us know if you have any comment, any question. TFA, CP, and I think all the partners that have been provided information would like to keep this tool alive. And yes, and we really just want this to be a motivator for companies to set a target, to commit, and to engage on landscapes and jurisdictional initiatives. So, yeah, I think now this is live in the Jurisdictional Approach Network Hub. This is also live on the CDP website. And if we go back to the presentation. You can access to the map, yes, in our website, and please let us know about any collaboration, any inquiry. We want to keep the information updated and with the most accurate and relevant information. So yeah, this will be a live map. And now I pass it over to Patrick.
Great, thank you so much, Norma, and thanks for having me on this webinar. Before I get into the few slides that I have, I want to congratulate CDP and TFA. That is a huge lift and an amazing resource that I think will be really valuable for anybody that's looking to engage or even understand what landscape initiatives look like in practice around the world. So congratulations, great work. My few slides are talking about how the community of organizations that are working to facilitate landscape and jurisdictional initiatives have come together over the last few years. You can see all the organizations, the same ones and more that were engaged with the development of the map. This group of organizations has made commitments to try to align on our understanding of what good practice looks like around landscape and jurisdictional action and claims. And this is really intended to make it easier for companies to engage with landscape initiatives and understand what their role is and how they can talk about the good work that they're supporting. So if we go to the next slide, one of the most recent thing that we've done as a community is, and this is quite basic but really important, is to align around the definition or core criteria for landscape initiatives. And they're very basic concepts. There's 4 of them, and you will have seen these. CDP has used an iteration of these historically, as have some other organizations. But they're really important elements, and they're all necessary for considering an activity or a collaboration to be a landscape initiative. So we look at the scale of the initiative. It has to be operating at a defined ecological, socioeconomic, or administrative area. Practically, landscape initiatives operate in the hundreds of thousands of hectares, often much larger than that. So we're not talking about individual projects. This is something that has meaningful impact. You're at a scale that you're able to address some of the system conditions to support better production, better socioeconomic and environmental outcomes. Multi-stakeholder governance is critical here. This is about stakeholders coming together and aligning or agreeing on the design, implementation, and monitoring of an initiative. So it's really about the alignment of stakeholders. Collective goals and actions is really what they work on together, is to figure out, okay, so what are we trying to achieve at a landscape scale around sustainability impact? And then what are the different actions that individual organizations or companies or technical providers can support towards those sustainability impact goals? And then the collective monitoring. We know there's a lot of individual project-based monitoring, but one of the important things at a landscape scale is that we have a holistic understanding of how things are improving or not, so that we can refine those activities and improve the impact that the initiative as a whole is having. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that there are a number of common positions that all of those organizations you saw on the first slide have agreed to. And these are around landscape action, performance monitoring, and claims. So these are oriented to companies. They're to help you to better understand what are the ways that we can engage in landscape initiatives, and importantly, how can we talk about what has happened there? How can we talk about our aspirations, what we're trying to achieve, the actions that have actually been taken, and ultimately the performance impacts that result. Next slide. And all of these resources are available on ISEAL's site as well as on the Jurisdictional Action Resource Hub. So one of the first of those position papers, I think, is important in the context of this conversation, which is really about how can companies take that first step. And in this context, it's important to understand what are the characteristics of a landscape investment and action. So those core criteria that I mentioned, those are fundamental descriptors of a landscape initiative. But then what kind of action should a company be taking, or how do you ensure that your investment is really having that impact? And so in the first instance, it's about contributing to agreed landscape goals on priority sustainability topics. So making sure that your investment is going to something that has come out of a collective alignment around the goals we're trying to achieve. Importantly, it also should create impact beyond supply chains. So this isn't regular, we work with our supply chains, we invest in supporting them. That's critically important. This is an and in addition to that. That is to say, okay, so if we actually are concerned about deforestation or loss of biodiversity or equitable livelihoods, those are broader than just our supply chains. They are issues that need to be addressed at a systematic level, and that's why landscape initiatives are critically important, because they're looking holistically. And so what we want to do with investments is really try to ensure that we can create impact beyond those individual supply chains so that we can meaningfully address those systemic issues. And there's a few other supporting features here. If you think about your investment, it's not just about taking action on the ground, it's also about supporting the mechanism that will ensure the effectiveness of collective action. So the multi-stakeholder coordination process, collective action plans, and potentially also investing in some of those enabling conditions, like looking at the policy landscape. And if we go to the next slide and final slide, this is just to say that as well as having that amazing map of all the landscape and jurisdictional initiatives on the Jurisdictional Action Resource Hub, we've also got an interactive roadmap where we talk about the different ways that companies can engage in landscapes. There's good resources there. And then there's also resources about the types of commitments, actions, and performance that companies can take, and how, again, you can communicate about those pieces. So that's worth checking out. We'll include the link. I think, yeah, Jack has just linked in the chat. But let's hear from our panelists. So I'm going to take us through the rest of the conversation today, and bring Tom and John in, as well as Norma. And as Jack mentioned at the top of the hour, if you have any questions that you want to put in the chat, or in the Q&A rather, we'll try to get to some of those at the end of the conversation. But Tom, let me come to you first. So you work with Tesco. You're also the co-lead on the landscape working group within the CGF Forest Positive Coalition. What is it about landscape initiatives that are attractive to the CGF, and why is it that the collective of companies engaged are actually investing in landscapes in the first place? What drew you to that as a strategy?
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick, and also thank you to everyone for attending today. It's a pleasure to come and speak. I think it's a really good question. I think the most salient point is the fact that the Forest Positive Coalition, which currently has, I believe, 21 members, are some of the largest consumer goods companies on earth. And we have been working together for a number of years. I believe that the FPC was first formed in 2018 around this idea about becoming forest positive, and that is starting to evolve as we move through our kind of target years. The reality was that it's all well and good using certification. It's all well and good investing into your own supply chain, or working on traceability systems and so forth. And all of those things are really important parts of becoming deforestation and conversion free, or tackling ecosystem destruction. But the reality is that it's kind of fiddling while Rome burns. You need to tackle the issue on the ground and tackle the associated risks that come with that. When I think about, for example, cocoa, we know that deforestation isn't a tactic that farmers want to take just because they enjoy doing it. We know that it's linked to intense poverty. So what you need to start looking at is what's the infrastructure, what are the structures in place on the ground that are either assisting those problems or negating them, and investing into those. So it's a really long process. We haven't got it right yet. There's a lot of work going on in the Landscapes Working Group to improve the situation. And it's not a magic wand, but we are making progress, and it feels like it's a really important step for companies to be taking. So that's a bit of a politician's answer, but in a roundabout way, that's why it's important. It's about making as much use of our influence and money as possible in the places that it really needs to be.
And I think one of the real values of the FPC, the Forest Positive Coalition, is also the collaboration, the fact that you're aligning around those investments. Can you speak a little bit to what that looks like in practice, and why it's worth looking at what other companies are doing and how you can collaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tesco is one of a number of retailers that sits on there. One of our counterparts in the UK is on there, as well as international partners. But some of the other groups that we have there are the Marses, the Mondeleses, the Unilevers of the world. With our two focuses, collaborating together means that we can reach to all parts of the supply chain. There are still challenges. There are still doors that we can't necessarily get through, but pooling our resources, and really importantly, having public reporting with publicly agreed targets, means we can hold each other to account, and gives companies like Tesco, with Unilever and Mars and the rest, the opportunity to collegially support each other, if necessary, behind closed doors, have difficult conversations, but that's part of the vibrant debate that we have. But it's about working together. Members may move faster than others, and that's understandable, different experiences, different resources and so forth, but we're all moving forward under one collective framework. It's easy for external companies to understand, but it's also easy for members such as myself to consistently refer to it and ensure that what is Tesco doing? Is it in step with its partners? Great. What can we learn from our partners? Great. That's the kind of that's the attitude that we take, and one of the reasons that we still remain a member 6 years on now.
Excellent. That's really insightful. Thanks, Tom. I want to bring John in. John, Conservation International was mentioned. Norma showed that you've invested and are working in a number of landscapes. Examples on the map were there. to Tom's point, it's not easy. We haven't figured it out yet. Landscape and jurisdictional initiatives seem like complicated multi-year investments, and we're not sure of the long-term success. Why would Conservation International decide to use landscapes as a filter or a way to support more conservation outcomes?
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for the question. I think for us, we've been at this, we and many others, our peers, have been working on conservation and sustainable development for decades. And I think one of you alluded to it before, we've seen very loud and clear that if we're dealing with systemic challenges of, deforestation, poverty, sustainable development, if we try and address those individually in their silos, we've seen it's not effective at the scale at which we need. And so really the driver for us for embracing this approach is the quest for scale, permanence, and inclusivity. Because we have to find solutions that combine sustainable production and conservation, because we know those things need to go together. And if you just have all the sustainable suppliers in the world, but the other farmers in the landscape may be deforesting, your supply chain is still going to be volatile. If you're ignoring or not dealing with the social challenges or land tenure issues in the landscape, your supply chain is likely still going to get caught up in social conflict. Similarly, if we don't have government at the table and we're not understanding what are their aspirations, which are usually about development, and if we're not thinking about how do we make that happen, how do we enable that, and how do we break down this perception that it's either standing for us or development, then we know we're not going to be successful. And so we have to bring these different stakeholders together, as you said, through the multi-stakeholder processes to find those common visions, common targets, and then figure out how do we work collectively towards those together. And so very much, as you said, a long journey. It's a team sport. There's no one company that's going to solve this. And so one of the things that we've really seen, one of the benefits from this is that, we can build momentum. And we've seen by bringing in some private sector partners, it helps us attract public finance and public investment. And we can create a bit of a positive snowball, if you will, and building of partners and investments. And that's where, again, we appreciate and I'd echo your support for the work that TFA and CDP did in this map, because that gives exposure. And we also want to recognize the participants on the ground, the local governments, state, national governments that are engaging, that are showing this leadership, because we want them to get that support. And that's where the CDP reporting is also so important, to give them kind of profile and exposure so we can bring in more partners, more investment.
Yeah, it's interesting. We, as a community, starting to think about what are the elements of successful landscape initiatives. What are the prerequisites? And local government engagement seems to be one of those critical elements. I want to bring us back to the theme of, so if I'm a company and I'm thinking, okay, well, yeah, this addressing systemic issues or issues at a systemic level makes sense. I am actually interested in engaging. We've got these new tools. That's great. John, what's been your experience when you're just starting a new relationship with a company, or a company comes to CI to talk about investing in landscapes? What are they looking for, and how can a company go about making that first investment?
The most important thing I would say there is make that first investment, get started. And again, the map is a great opportunity to find partners. And I think the key thing here is that there's maybe companies that we've worked with for many years that are able to make relatively large investments. There may also be companies that are just starting, that are just learning to put a toe in the water. And again, key is get the toe in the water, get the foot in the water, keep going with these initiatives, because we need more partners, we need more investment. And so it can start in steps, if you will. But I think if you're making a smaller investment, you also have to recognize that can create challenges for your partners on the ground if they're managing lots of different small contracts. the legal requirements and so forth. So then maybe look for opportunities for pooling investments through your industry associations or others. Maybe, be willing to accept standardized reporting, because again, for partners on the ground, if they're trying to do multiple little contracts, that gets very, it gets time intensive, it burns up resources, and we really want those resources going to impact on the ground.
Yeah, it feels like the CGF, the Forest Positive Coalition, is such a good example of how companies have come together to pool those resources. And Tom, back to you. Do you feel like with the Forest Positive Coalition, there's a good model there for other companies to follow, or what are the ways, like John was mentioning, that companies can? If I'm a small company, I'm not going to make a significant investment. I have to start somewhere. How can I maximize the impact that investment is having?
Yeah, so that's definitely something that we're focused on at the moment. One of the first parts that we've done is mapped out all of the landscape investments that each of the members have, similar to the work that you guys have done. And what we then do is, one, we ensure that our reporting for that is public. So not only do we disclose in CDP, but we also do yearly Forest Positive Coalition reporting. That's a report, I believe, that comes out. It may have already come out, but it might come out later this month, and that's publicly available. And you can see there, what members are investing and where those investments are and what those projects are doing. So that's kind of the first part, is just the collective sharing of that information and experience on the ground. Some of us operate directly in those countries. If anyone knows Tesco, you'll know that we're a very European-centric company. We don't have any investments within the United Kingdom, within the single market, but we're sourcing from places like Brazil, and that's where our first real landscape jurisdictional approach is actually currently ongoing. With the FPC itself, one of the other really important things is to follow up on what John said. Is it is really important to put your toe in the water, and you don't really get a feel for it until you're kind of doing it. One thing that helps with the FPC is people have done it before us, so you can ask those people questions, which is great. The second is that the FPC is currently working on a model which gives an indication of roughly how much you can spend per hectare to achieve, not to achieve certain goals, but to kind of get projects going. So whilst I'd love to sit here and say, look, $5,000 is fantastic, and $5,000 is nothing to be sniffed at, but we need to strike a balance between the real massive investments that we need, but something that's affordable for the companies. So one of the other ways that we're working on is, apart from working out what that kind of dollar per hectare is trying to build up relationships with financial institutions to understand what would also help tick their boxes. Because I think everyone can admit here that, if governments aren't going to do it now, it's responsibilities of companies like ourselves to step into the breach, but we can't carry the whole endeavor all the way through. We just need to get it to a position where, private financial investment and or government can come in and start to grease the wheel a bit more. So that's what we're currently working on. So apologies, I keep making my answers too long-winded, but it starts off with understanding and learning from your members. It talks about making sure that we're being publicly accountable and we're sharing information. But then it goes into the nuts and bolts of how much does it cost and how can we make it an investor-friendly environment whilst also achieving those goals. And that's what I think is ultimately the goal of driving forward investment.
Yeah. Patrick, can I pick up on the toe in the water comment? I'm sorry. I am an NGO, and I have to hit on this point of, we absolutely want to make this easy and practical for companies to get engaged. Yeah. However, I couldn't leave this webinar without stressing the urgency of what we face. And I think we see it every day. We're facing another hurricane that's currently Category 1, likely to be Category 4 before it hits land. We see the headlines every day, and it's the global, not just the climate crisis, but the biodiversity crisis, and they're flip sides of the same coin. So I really want to hit on this urgency point of get engaged, get involved, put a toe, but we really need everybody jumping in. And to Tom's point, the real importance of, one of the things that I saw at Climate Week, I had the fortune of attending a couple of days this week, is there's a ton of discussion around finance and innovation in finance, which is super important, because to Tom's point, philanthropic dollars alone are not going to solve these dual crises that we face. So we need the investment, we need the leading actors now to get engaged, to provide some of that support that we need to figure out how do we build the capacity, how do we elevate these initiatives so that they can potentially access and work towards more commercial forms of capital, longer term forms of investment. That's critically important. But we've also seen, we know there's lots of funds out there and lots of impact ventures and so forth. But pipeline is a challenge for everybody. And so we really need that investment on the ground to build up the capacity of these initiatives so that they can tap those growing forms of finance. And I think that's where landscape initiatives have the potential to do that. But they really need that flexible investment to get started and to build that capacity and to find what are the right mechanisms so that we can get those groups on the ground connected to more viable, longer term forms of finance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Patrick, could I add something extra to that as well? Apologies, I don't
Sure,
want
and
to
then I'm going to bring Norma in. But yeah, please go ahead, Tom.
I also wanted to say that obviously John is absolutely right. The nature and biodiversity crisis is on our doorsteps and is getting worse every day. I think as well, if that isn't going to be, obviously these arguments need to be multifaceted. The other side of it as well is that there is an economical and legal imperative. Now, I'm sure lots of members on the call are sick and tired of hearing the letters EUDR, but things like the EUDR are here to stay. They are going to become, over time, hopefully, the norm. And whilst they aren't perfect, they are a step in the right direction. Having jurisdictional approaches in your supply chain will not guarantee compliance, but will set you really well on the path. And it's creating resilience in your supply chain, and it's putting you ahead of potentially where competitors are. I don't think, sometimes this is kind of an ugly word to use, but that economic imperative is really important. And that's one of the ways in which we're looking at it, that it's not just helping us with the biodiversity crisis, but it's also helping us with our own regulatory requirements that we have because of obviously the laws that are coming. And it's a challenge that we welcome.
Yeah. Great. Let me actually then just take that question and or that response and turn it around for Norma. I mean, you're seeing the companies that are coming to CDP are reporting their landscape and jurisdictional action and engagement. What are you seeing in terms of the ways that companies are coming in? They initially come in with one investment. Do you get a sense of the scale of investment? Do you get a sense of whether they're doing this in a coordinated way with landscape initiatives, or it's just, they're working in they're sourcing from certain supply regions and therefore they've started investing there? Like practically, what does that look like?
Yes, that's a very good point. In the majority of the cases, companies are piloting landscape initiatives investments at the moment. 2/3 of the total initiatives disclosed and featured in the map are companies engaging only in one initiative. So, of course, we have cases like Mondelez, that are actually like Musimas, that landscape initiatives and jurisdictional approaches are part of their sustainability sourcing strategy. But in general, it is still a pilot initiative for the majority of them. But now, with the initiatives that they are engaging, that they're proving impact, that they're proving results, it's like, okay, now, it's time to get the next step and make it part of your sustainability strategy, or your nature strategy, your climate change implementation actions, everything, as John and Tom said, fully agree with the insight.
And one of the other things that John said was around government engagement, and you've also got the cities and states or cities and regions survey response. The number of governments that are engaging in landscape initiatives, jurisdictional initiatives, is that also increasing just like it is for companies?
Well, that's a good point, and that's also a different challenge. In the case of states and regions, we have the initial challenge that jurisdictional approaches are, or that the disclosure aspect is usually only featured or being done by the Ministry of Environment. But a credible jurisdictional approach should consider also other ministries, and really needs to demonstrate this leadership cross-sectorially in their jurisdiction. And that is definitely a huge challenge. Although the states and regions disclosure is increasing in CDP, their jurisdictional programs that are considered nature and biodiversity holistically with demonstrated leadership are not growing as fast as the corporates. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like the other part, no, that also funding is needed across and beyond administrative periods. And that is what sometimes funding and having a multi-stakeholder governance process or platform give continuity to the initiatives. So that's why we also decided to put in the map, like, okay, let's also feature the governance platforms, because these are the elements that can facilitate continuity of initiatives independently of changes of administrative political periods. And that also can give a good insight for government. No?
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit for a few minutes about business case, because I think that's one of the critical hurdles here is, you know, as a company, I can imagine it's easier to make the case for investing in my supply chain than it is for something beyond my supply chain, large and somewhat amorphous, like a landscape initiative. Tom, can you speak a little bit to well, what the business case is within Tesco, like why invest in landscape approaches? And to one of the questions that came in the Q&A, do companies really see this as a way to address physical climate risks in their supply chain? So is this a risk mitigation strategy as well as a philanthropic or addressing sustainability issues more broadly strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with the second question. The answer is yes. So it is definitely as much to do with a philanthropic investment as well as resilience and risk mitigation within the supply chain. Now, you know, our scheme is not yet at a mature level that we could necessarily measure, you know, the greenhouse gas emission reductions and so forth, but it is on the right track. But it is part of that new way of thinking that let's not just buy soy credits, for example. Let's put that money into schemes that are working on the ground to help deliver these targets that we have. So to answer the second one, yes, absolutely, they go hand in hand. To go back to the first question, Tesco came at the landscapes jurisdictional approach kind of game, if I may say, from a different angle. And that was because we were originally involved in discussions about the Cerrado mechanism back in 2018, 2019. Yeah. And we were going to be one of the signatories. We were looking to put investment into that. And unfortunately, that program at the last minute did unfortunately come to an end. But the idea sparked within Tesco and a number of other UK retailers that were a part of that conversation, a real desire to see if we could still get a similar mechanism off the ground. And I'm incredibly proud to say that we did, and that our initial investment has helped this happen. This is the Responsible Commodities Facility we're talking about. Apologies. But that's how it started for us. It's then after that the conversations about risk mitigation have come in, and resilience. And now that we're getting that regulatory space that feels, you know, it doesn't explicitly say that jurisdictional approaches will do this for you, but it feels the most complete framework that exists at the moment to help achieve that over time. So that's why we're kind of throwing ourselves into that now. It's slow going, and it's a very difficult set of conversations that we have, and they're evolving, but you know, we're making progress, and hopefully we can talk about other investments in the future.
Great.
Patrick, can I pick up on that one?
Yeah, and John, yes, you can. And I want to also put a question to you to answer at the same time. So one of the things Tom mentioned, EUDR, top of mind for companies that are engaged in those commodity supply chains. That's just one piece of this emerging regulatory and reporting landscape. There's all sorts of due diligence legislation emerging. There's the TNFD and the SBTI, SBTN, nature, climate reporting disclosure. It seems like we're on a trajectory. To what extent is that a driving force for companies to think about landscape and jurisdictional initiative investment?
It's a good question, and I think it's generating a lot of really good discussion. It's generating questions about supply chains. It's pushing a lot of companies that may not have understood their full supply chains. They're complex and maybe far down the value chain to better understand that. And that is super, super valuable. But the thing we need to be careful about with some of these initiatives is that they don't think about this from a risk avoidance point of view and say, oh, that there might be some risk there. So supplier, give me a commodity from somewhere else, or give me a supplier from somewhere else. Because one, it doesn't do anything to contribute to solutions. And I think the expectations for leading companies are contributing solutions. And it could potentially directly contribute to excluding smallholder suppliers, small farmer communities from access to European markets. And so I think it's really important that companies don't look at it as a way to say as just risk avoidance, but to understand their supply chains better, to understand some of the challenges, and then to deploy and look for these landscape solutions, landscape partners to help them really deal with the challenges. And I think that was a point I wanted to make earlier, is the clarification that we don't look at it as a supply chain approach or a landscape approach. It's not an either or, it's a both and, because you still need to work with your suppliers, you still need to be engaging farmers in your supply chain, but the real value, to the point you raised around risk mitigation, is nesting those investments in these larger frameworks and these larger initiatives so that you can leverage those investments, so that your partners can leverage those investments to show to farmers and governments that there's interest in sustainability, there's value in supporting these, there's opportunities for improved production that doesn't involve deforestation, for improved production that keeps smallholders in supply chains. So we really need both, and the trick is, again, how to link those together, and that's where the landscape and jurisdictional approach is so important. You mentioned the government engagement, and there's a question here about it, and it's super, super important. And that's why, we prefer to talk about jurisdictional approaches, because the jurisdiction, you can be very clear. Is this a county? Is this a state? Is this a nation? And it's very clear what's the scale we're talking about and who are the critical stakeholders that we need to have at the table. And I think that's super, super important. And Norma also mentioned it, that have stakeholders from different parts of government, because we as a conservation NGO, we may have really good relationships with the Ministry of Environment, but we also really need the Ministry of Agriculture there. We need the Ministry of Finance there, because again, we need to figure out and how to break down these barriers so it isn't just about conservation or agriculture, but we can bring them both together. And it's part of what makes an initiative like the one in Ecuador so exciting. We're so pleased to support Ecuador's commitment to zero deforestation palm oil, their commitment to the RSPO jurisdictional initiative, because it's run by the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment working together to achieve those aims. And you have a really nice policy linkage there in connection to some of Ecuador's other policy commitments, like its national RED program, its national climate strategy. And that's what we need to find, is how to create these positive investment circles, if you will, that can support climate goals, development goals, conservation goals.
And I want to clarify there, it's not just national government, it's not just the National Ministry of Environment, local government, state level, district level, critical role that they play, often the key drivers, because it's them and their constituents that are the ones directly affected by these landscape
and
initiatives.
That's been what we've seen in some of the real benefits of some of these landscape and jurisdictional initiatives, is really helping elevate and build the capacity of some of those local governments, so that they have a critical role to play, but we need them to be able to engage and to connect to some of these efforts as well. And that's where these landscape and jurisdictional initiatives can really play a key role.
Yeah. We have a few minutes left. I want to maybe finish off on coming back to the overarching theme. So recognizing that recognizing the urgency, first of all, and the scale, this is only going to work if we exponentially increase the number of companies that are investing and engaging in landscape and jurisdictional initiatives. Maybe John, to you first, and just a short response, but I'm interested, are there other things that we can do that can make this more attractive for companies to invest? Or what are the most important things that will enable companies to take that first step to make that investment?
I think some of the types of tools that you referred to before, that CDP, ISEAL, TFA have been creating are a great step, because we need to kind of break down the barriers and break down some of the mysticism around these landscape and jurisdictional approaches, because they don't need to be that complex. It's just getting engaged. They're, you know, multi-stakeholder processes, and it, you know, for companies to engage, it's knowing your supply chain, it's working with your suppliers, and it's understanding who they're working with on the ground. And there's great tools out there. The SourceUp platform, the Landscale platform, like there's a variety of others out there where companies can start to look and understand, you know, you should understand your supply chain, places where you're sourcing. You can go start to find initiatives in those places, and then talk to partners, pick up the phone and call somebody. There's, you know, lots of NGOs and other organizations out there that are willing to have that conversation, because we need the partners.
Yeah. And Tom, how would you convince your fellow retailers to engage more in landscape and jurisdictional initiatives?
I think I love the way that you said that, John, about demystifying it. That's absolutely right, because it's obviously incredibly complex, but getting it started is actually incredibly simple. It's just, you think of it from the outside that it's this impossible thing, and just being able to have that conversation does help. In terms of convincing other retailers, I think, again, for us, we've got a relative head start on this, because all UK retailers are members of what's called the UK Soy Manifesto, which is a set of collective goals around ensuring that the entirety of the UK's imports of soy hit a certain kind of criteria by the end of 2025, and that criteria is being deforestation and conversion free. So for us, it's an argument about a level playing field. It shouldn't occur in sustainability conversations, but sometimes it does. And the worry is that if we have stronger targets, or someone else has stronger targets, it creates an unlevel playing field. So often, if we are having those conversations, I must admit, most of the time we're preaching to the choir, that it's talking about how collectively we can make that impact, that we can share in that in those positive outturns, but also that, you know, they're not doing anything different to us. We're not doing anything different to them. We're showing that kind of UK retailer, for example, can be a force for good. And there's a real feel-good factor that comes from that. Again, in terms of the actual direct investment, it's, once you break the ice on that conversation, it's much easier to have those conversations again. So learning from each other, you know, to a certain extent, understanding what our supply chains look like. The reality is that most of them are very, very similar. You can take bits and pieces from each other in a obviously pre-competitive manner, and you can build something that works together. But for us, we found the greatest success in just getting around the table with the right legal representation and talking about initiatives that affect commonly shared supply chains, that affect, for example, British agriculture or UK imports, or the fact that, you know, the Cerrado is one of the areas that we're mainly sourcing soy from as a country, and that is on fire currently. So how can we work together? That's where we start the conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And we just have a minute left, but Norma, I do want to give you the last word. Any thoughts about how companies can engage, take that initial first step?
Just to complement, I think we need to move on now from companies only looking at landscapes and jurisdictional initiatives for the commodity production objectives, but really to demystify all of the other nature goals that landscape and jurisdictional initiatives provide. No? And now it's time to jump into tech companies, oil companies, and all other of the broad of companies that are not only disclosing to CDP, but that are committing to nature and biodiversity goals, and bring them in the table of landscapes and jurisdictional issues.
Excellent. Thank you all. I really appreciate your open and informative responses. We had a number of questions come in on the Q&A that we didn't answer, and I'll make sure the panelists get those, and that we'll circulate the answers along with the recording of this. But Jack, I'm just going to pass it back to you for any last words. And thank you again, and please do check out both the resource hub and the new map. It's really quite something.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick, and thanks again to all the panelists for joining. Yeah, there's nothing left for me to say other than thanks everyone for joining, and yeah, I'll send through the resources that we've shared in email next week, and have a good rest of your day. But thanks again everyone for participating, and thanks to the panelists. That was a really great discussion.
My pleasure.
So-
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.